Hello, I'm Dave. I'm an educational psychologist. I work in Mindworks. That means I have the privilege of working alongside fantastic primary mental health workers, CWPs, and mental health support teams in schools. Today, we're many. There's many of us today in the chat, in the group. It's a very big topic, and we've got 90 minutes. So I'm going to try and promise and deliver on pacey. And thankfully, in advance of this meeting, you all shared some of your best hopes or what you're hoping to get away from 90 minutes coffee and chat around EBSNA. And thanks, Annika, for putting those best hopes together. That's what you see in front of you in the aims. So we're going to do a little bit of work on what is EBSNA, so a bit of definition work. We're going to move on then to look at the kind of practical end of things, what works, what are the strategies that are effective in getting a young person to attend, but even better participate in their education. And finally, there'll be a bit of signposting towards the end. So if you're looking for further reading, resources, just helpful things to signpost others onto. That's the mix we're going for. There's also this aim around connection and networking, and hopefully we'll achieve that through our breakout rooms, a chance to speak to each other around what's your role in what is a really broad and interactive area. Just in terms of broader context, you'll see that example of a newspaper article there. I think at least every 2 weeks, every month, there's an article in one of the big newspapers around this national need. So it's a national picture and something that all areas are trying to address. Thanks, Annika. So launching straight in with the first aim, what is EBSNA? I think I just wanted to say these 4 things just by way of framing the whole discussion today. Literally, what is EBSNA? When we're saying these letters, it's an acronym. It's emotionally based school non-attendance. You might also hear EBSA, emotionally based school avoidance. That's okay as well. But notably, it's different to school refusal, truancy, avoidance, those kind of things. It's a broad definition. I think that can be really helpful, that it's a broad definition, because in its broadness, it invites that extra curiosity. What is the emotion or this non-attendance? What's the behavior that, what's the unmet need that's leading to this behavior? What's the non-attendance communicating? It's also broad because it's a spectrum. You can have EBSNA that's really complex, persistent, really stuck situation, a young person retreating not just out of school, but out of the community, out of the rest of the house, and they're retreating into the bedroom. It's also broad in terms of the underlying function. EBSNA is an expression of an unmet need, but that unmet need could be many and varied, often in interaction. Is it non-attendance due to anxiety? Is that anxiety found outside the house or in school? Is it non-attendance due to some relational factor at home, perhaps? The reasons are many and varied, and you don't get any of that information in the name EBSNA itself. It invites that curiosity. For me, the third bullet point, this is what I'm particularly interested in at the moment. EBSNA talks about attendance, and rightfully so, as education health professionals, we're interested in schools, kids attending school. But for me, EBSNA, on that broad spectrum that Nicola's going to talk about next, it's really just about participation more generally. You can have a young person who attends school but is not participating. I think that's a really important case to be working with. Equally, you can have a young person who's not attending school, nor are they able to participate in their life as things stand. And for me, for that young person, it's really participation is the goal. And then school attendance is secondary or follows on from that. Final point at the end there. I think if you're of my generation, when we were growing up, the talk was all about truancy or school refusal. And just to make it explicit, we're moving on from that kind of language. And we're moving on because talking about truancy or school refusal, it makes some assumptions around what's going on. And it implies a bit of blame or stigma. Blame and stigma, these are the kind of things that really shut down partnership working with home, compassion and curiosity. And those are the kind of things that can be problematic when trying to get a good outcome. Thanks, Annika.
Hi, I'm Nicola Mollett and I'm an educational psychologist. I practice in Surrey in the Northwest DP team, and I also teach at the Institute of Education, training educational psychologists. So this is something that is very passionate to me in both areas of my work. Looking here at the spectrum of EBSNA, I think following on from what Dave said, this is really important in illustrating the different types of non-attendance behaviour patterns. And as you can see from the top, school attendance with stress and pleas for non-attendance is maybe less severe, but works its way down to really entrenched and complex needs with severe difficulty for young people, where they really are struggling to come into school for an extended period of time. When we're thinking about how we support EBSNA, we need to make sure that we're building in sort of whole school practices and thinking about preventative work and really trying to capture an understanding of when this is beginning to happen for young people. So looking for early warning signs, which would be at the top of this spectrum, and identifying those, because it's our first response must be effective so that we can intervene early. If we miss these early warning signs, EBSNA can become much more complex and persistent, and where the young person is absent from school for a long period of time, which can be then a much more difficult cycle to break. This is where we need to be really creative and curious in trying to understand the young person and planning support and interventions for them. So not just thinking, as Dave said, about getting them present in school, but much more thinking about what is it we need to connect with them, help them stay motivated, and think about a graduated response to get them back into linking up and connecting with people that can support their education for their future life and development. So it might be that we'd start off by setting up connections and motivating activities with an adult from school, but off-site in the community, somewhere where they're comfortable going. For some of these children where it's chronic situations, actually getting them out of the house is a huge achievement for them, and we should never underestimate that. And we should constantly be thinking about how we can reduce hurdles for them to get them back into school. We might then plan to move a little bit more towards thinking about how they might begin to access something in school, an activity that's positive for them, and certainly getting them back into a stressful learning context in their normal classroom, say maths or literacy, whatever it is, would be probably for lots of these children further down the pathway of planning for them. Thank you. Annika, thanks. In terms of as well about thinking about causes, the causes of non-attendance for young people are likely to be significantly more complex than just thinking about that individual child in isolation of looking at them on their own. It's much more likely to involve multiple interacting factors. So it's really helpful to move away from taking too much of an individual focus to looking at the interaction between the different systems that may be having an impact on their situation. So thinking about the young person themselves, but their interaction with their environment. How do they feel in school? Do they have sensory needs? Is the school environment uncomfortable, overstimulating? Does it provoke fear or worry? And thinking about the relationships they have with other children, other adults, and thinking about support systems around the family. We know it's really critical to have a positive home-school relationship for the young person, that parents and school are seen to be joined up, supportive of each other, singing from the same, hymn sheet, talking from the same page. The model on the right, you can see, relates to theory suggesting the importance of understanding and addressing the wide range of systemic factors, and noticing that actually changes from the outer system can also lead to thinking about the outer system being things like school, other agencies, maybe even education policy, local authority people, support workers, mental health teams, can also have a positive impact for the young person themselves. So not to limit our thinking and to think broadly about the complex and interacting systems that surround the young person, in terms of kind of conceptualizing where we might not need to start problem solving and what we should be curious about. Thanks, Annika. So there's lots of huge amounts actually of research going into this, particularly at the moment, actually lots of very current research as well. But some of the things that we found really helpful in kind of understanding and beginning to plan support for young people is thinking about these 4 functions, or the reasons for why children might not be making it into school. And it suggests why it's sort of helpful, because then you can start to plan and connect between approaches and strategies to support the young person, thinking about home, child, school, and thinking about what it is that might be having the most impact on a young person. I think in all these conversations, one of the really important things to hold in mind is these situations can come about very suddenly for some reason, for some children, but also over time. And really important to know that we have to be really careful around placing blame in any one part of the system. It's an incredibly stressful experience for children, for families, and for schools. And we need to be really mindful how we think and talk about that. So I just wanted to say that before sort of going into just looking at these in a little bit more detail. So the first function that's thought about in this model is avoiding that the young person might be not going into school to avoid negative emotion. So they're not attending. It might be because being at school can bring about uncomfortable feelings. So feelings of worry, anxiety, low mood. Quite often, young people, particularly younger children, find it quite hard to pinpoint what this might be. So they do need a lot of support in thinking about what could make it better. We've got lots of lovely techniques that we use. Some of those we'll touch on later, but also we're always happy to share with people to help support getting a better understanding and picture of what's going on for the young person. The next one is situation avoidance, talked about in this framework. And that's when the young child might be avoiding situations that they find stressful. So it might be they don't want to go into school because the work is difficult, they get embarrassed putting their hand up, assessments are stressful, maybe particular friends upset them, or there's bullying, or they find assemblies difficult. Those kind of things that might be making it really difficult for a young person. And so hence they're not going into school to avoid the negativity around these situations. So you can see, I'm sure that's sort of familiar to lots of you in work that you're doing. Children can be quite particular and help us understand that quite clearly just through talking to them and understanding their views. What is it that's putting them off? The reason it's so important to hear this is because there's so many things we can do. Like a child that is not going into school because they're worried that they're going to get made to get changed for PE, and that might be they don't like getting changed to PE, they don't like the uniform, they get embarrassed getting undressed, they don't like running around, they don't understand the instructions. There's a lot of solutions that I'm sure people would be able to come up with for that around not having to get changed, or coming into school changed, or adjustments to the curriculum. So you can understand that unpicking some of these helps us provide the correct support that can make a difference to the young person. And as long as that's consistent and they feel safe and know it's going to be there for them, that can be a really helpful way forward. The next one down, number 3, attachment needing. So that's thinking about that children may actually be avoiding schools because it reduces anxiety associated with being away from people that are important to them. So maybe key family members that they rely on to manage their anxiety. And they may not even be aware of that. Family members may not even be aware of it. But sometimes that does become, sometimes actually it's very obvious because they either tell us, or they're acting out when they're being separated from that person. But again, it's thinking about who in school could support that transition into school. How are they greeted? How is the handover made? We talk a lot now about compassionate and relational approaches in school, so that we identify and flag up key individuals in school that develops a close connection with the person, that parent can trust to carry on that supportive relationship, and that young people know are a safe person to turn to, and they can identify that person and know that their needs will be held in mind in school. The fourth area that we might think about what's happening for a young person is thinking about tangible rewards. And that might be that some children spend time out of school because actually what they're doing out of school is much nicer for them than what they're doing in school. Well, actually, probably that would be applicable to very many children, but the balance is different here. We're talking about children that really have significant difficulties being in school. And so what's more motivating and fun outside of school is easier for them to access. So it might be, so for us thinking about this, it's really important to think about this, that we're not blaming anyone for setting up these situations. It's a complex problem with an interaction of many different factors that are creating a scenario that means it's difficult for the young person to go in because of things that are nicer at home. And that's often quite closely linked to with actually avoiding negative emotions in school. So you can see there that the first 2 functions that are talked about are avoiding or escaping something within school, whereas the second 2 are more about sort of some perceived benefit from being at home or doing something outside of school. But again, we have to be really careful in the language that we use around that to make sure that nobody's being blamed for setting something up that's come about, but that we do have open and honest conversations about what is going on so that we can really begin to work together to make a difference. Just to point out here, you can see there at the bottom of the slide, there's a sort of what's called a push-pull framework. That is a framework that stands alone on its own, which I won't go into now, but I think it is useful because sometimes that language is used and it's quite helpful language to think it's just about another way of talking about accounting for factors that mean a young person isn't going into school. So it's a little bit oversimplified in that way, but it does help us to think a little bit about, you know, the tangible rewards and attachment. Needing points 3 and 4 might be a kind of pull towards the home. You know, children are pulled to stay at home, whereas reduce. So you might then think about how to reduce this pull factor to increase the push back to school. So it's quite a nice way of just kind of conceptualizing that in sort of simple form. Thank you.
That's our kind of input around what is EBSNA. Why is it called EBSNA? Why do we use that language? And a couple of ways of kind of formulating the interacting factors, and then those 4 specific functions. Moving on to best practice and strategies now. And I think we start with these key words: curiosity, compassion, and partnership. These are key words held up by the Surrey EBSNA partnership. And I imagine, looking at the list of professionals here today, these are things that we all embody naturally in all that we do, and for good reason. They're nice. This is kind of what it is to be a good human, but also they're effective, and that extends to all our work in EBSNA or around young person work, participation, and motivation more generally. I haven't come across a successful bit of EBSNA work that I'm involved in or I hear about where these 3 words are not evident in abundance. Neither have I encountered a stuck situation where it's stuck for want of one of these things not quite being in place yet. So I think I'm saying these are intuitive, hopefully for us all, but also from practice-based evidence, this is what we see. So yes, curiosity, compassion, partnership. Curiosity is all about that kind of wondering stance that we assume as professionals, being really curious around, yes, this is stuck, yes, this is problematic, but what is underneath? What is the unmet need? Or what is the skill that needs to be developed? Or what is the relationship dynamic that is making this not quite progress like we'd like? So lots of curiosity and wondering. And all that Nicola presented is what can help us be curious in the EBSNA context. Which function is primarily driving this of those 4? What push and pull factors are there for this individual young person and their parent and school as a system? Going to move on to the resilience ball next as well. I think a really powerful framework for being curious in a really safe way around what is going on for this young person. The curiosity extends to talking about strengths, interests, best hopes, values, goals. Any information, and particularly child, young person information and voice, can be really, really pivotal in unsticking an EBSNA situation. Compassion, hopefully self-evident, but I really love this phrase, every interaction is an intervention. Just by sitting down and giving a parent, carer, school professional, colleague that experience of unconditional positive regard, of being heard, listened to, empathized with, sometimes that's the thing that can really make a difference in a context where maybe there's been a bit of antagonized interaction or there's a bit of blaming going on. As professionals, we have a great role in giving a different experience of interaction, and sometimes that can just de-escalate and then invite curiosity and change. And finally, partnership. Where these cases get really, really stuck, in my view, is where, in particular, the home-school relationship breaks down. And it links into curiosity and compassion, but if you have a situation where school and parents and carers are not working effectively together, that might be because there's been a breakdown in trust, a breakdown in communication. Maybe there's not yet a shared understanding of what the need actually is, or there's different goals. School are aiming for this and parents are actually aiming for something completely different. that's when those things can really rapidly fall apart, or certainly get very stagnant. I mean, our role as professionals, I think, is to embody and model curiosity, compassion, and partnership, but also to try and promote and facilitate partnerships between professionals, between adults and the young person who they're trying to support. And most significantly, I think, around attendance between parent, carers, and school. And I always picture a parent trying their best at home with a young person with additional needs who's showing loads and loads of distress behaviors in the morning, perhaps, saying that can't go into school. The amount of challenge that presents to a parent is huge. We need to empathize with that. In particular, if that parent doesn't believe that the school is a safe place, or doesn't believe that school are listening to what their concerns are or validating their experience, it becomes insurmountable. So just to really highlight the importance of partnership there. Thanks, Annika. This is an example of a psychological framework that can be really helpful in supporting curiosity and partnership work. It's a kind of risk-free way of exploring with professionals, a young person, parents, and school, what's going on for a young person with regards to their motivation, their participation, and perhaps their attendance. It comes from a psychologist called Kath Lother. What she did really helpfully is look at 5 decades of psychological research on resilience, often misused word. She advocates for resilience as this innate capacity that we all have to grow in response to a setback. And resilience is just what happens when we have good enough resources around us or good enough factors around us. Looking through those 50 years of psychology research on resilience, endless lists in every single individual bit of research, and she helpfully pulled it together into these 5 factors. Her argument for any young person and any adult and any family, so it can be a group thing, if you have these 5 things in place, that will mean that that family, that individual, that young person, will be better able to adapt and grow in response to difficulty. And so in our work, we can be curious and listen out for, and then try and fill in gaps around where the strengths and the weaknesses are in this kind of 5-factor model. So for a young person, you might have in your mind now, you'll be asking about what's their experience of bonding. And by that, we're talking about what's their experience of trusted relationships? Do they feel like they can be themselves with their friends? Are there adults that they can trust? Do they feel like they belong in a group or a school community? Do they feel like they can belong safely somewhere? Mastery is about their experience as a learner, like words like self-efficacy, your belief in yourself and your capability. I always think of a young person with literacy difficulties for mastery. If you have literacy difficulties, your experience of yourself as a learner, as someone able to get better with practice, is a bit more at risk, particularly in a school context, in that particular environment. You can also get a sense of mastery through clubs, getting better at bending the ball like Beckham on a free kick or a corner kick. And that's the kind of experience that can be protective and help people have that inner voice of, I can do it with practice, I can overcome. Meaning is my favorite one. It's all about values, goals, aspirations, role models. You can imagine if you're faced with a setback or a really challenging situation, if you've got that really clear view of, I'm a person who wants to help others, that's of value to me, or this is what I want to do with myself in 5 years' time. That's the kind of motivator that can really pull you through a challenge or make you curious about what skills I can develop to overcome so that I can pursue the thing I want to pursue. A role model can help with this, having a person you want to be like, for example. Skills is about just that question. Does this young person have the skills they need to cope with the day-to-day challenges they face? Often this is about skills to cope with anxiety. It could be broader emotional regulation skills, but it also includes learning to learn skills, social interaction skills, so metacognition, reading, literacy, numeracy, and those kind of things. You can imagine if you didn't, or you were delayed in developing one or other of those skills, your day-to-day experience of school will be more challenging than your peers, and that's then a risk factor for non-attendance or reduced participation. Finally, but critically, is the basics. Thinking about our capacity to grow and respond in response to challenge, just really, really hard to do if we're hungry, if we're thirsty, if we're tired. Sleep is just so relevant with our work with children and young persons. But also really hard to do if we're not feeling emotionally or physically safe in our environment. So the use of this is as a conversation tool. It helps us be curious in a way that is safe in partnership with the adults around a kid, school, parents, other professionals. We try and identify strengths. This is a young person where there is a really strong sense of belonging, and they've developed some really helpful skills to cope with their day-to-day adversities and disadvantage. However, for this young person, sleep is an issue in the basics, and actually they haven't quite cultivated that sense of who it is they want to be as a person, what kind of person they want to be, that meaning block, and so on and so on. We're going to move on now to the kind of practical examples, and we're going to have 3 case examples where things went well, and then we'll move on to some resources that we particularly find helpful in our work with children and young people experiencing reduced participation or non-attendance. Thanks, Annika. This first example, it comes from a fantastic primary mental health worker. I think she might be in the group today, actually, so thank you very much for supplying this example. In the box on the right, you've kind of got the commentary, and highlighted is where that commentary comes from. The first thing to highlight is in the green, the outcome of this bit of work from the primary mental health worker based on the strength of her relationship with the school, and therefore the partnership she was able to cultivate between home, school, and young person. Can't think of a better outcome than that description of the young person being full of beans once again. For me, that just really highlights the goal is often around participation and emotional well-being, just as much as it might be around attendance. That's kind of a collateral or a side effect of being full of beans, I would say. And what worked in this case? Well, looking at the highlighted sections from the top to the bottom, there was a use of a resource, and we'll be looking at resources a bit later. In particular, this is a resource that helped with child, young person voice, curiosity around the situation more generally, helped answer the question, what is going on for this young person? There's evidence of partnership in the second and third highlighted bits. This wasn't just a piece of work with a kid, neither was it just a piece of work with a school professional. This was a collaboration between young person, school professional, and the primary mental health worker. The CALM plan that was produced, again, that was a joint piece of work, so partnership. Going down to the bullet points, this primary mental health worker's view of what helped. It was learning a skill, think the resilience framework, learning self-soothing strategies as an example of skill development. This young person needed some strategy for calming down, and they learned it, and that helped. The trusted adult in school, for me, makes me think about bonding, that first green block on the resilience framework. Also the third function of EBSNA, the kind of attachment security. At the end there, that reflection on success, something we forget to do sometimes, isn't it? We can be very focused on what the problem is, focused on what the need is, focused on what a young person might be incapable of yet. But actually, sometimes we need to sit down and celebrate, look at the progress we've made. And it can be really huge progress for a young person to go from sitting in the bedroom to walking the dog, for example. We can capture that and be curious about that. What helped you do such a big step? Thanks, Annika.
This is a piece of work that I was involved in, actually, and with an educational psychologist, we're involved at different levels. It can be workarounds, possibly when we're working around non-attendance, early intervention, school audit, school training. But one of this particular example is around a really complex need where the young person needed additional resources and support. So went through the education healthcare needs assessment process, and a number of professionals were involved in that. It's a lovely young person who's fun, curious, energetic, but significant needs around autism and ADHD. And so definitely for this young person, there's a significant question around the intersectionality of his EBSNA needs, but also unmet needs in schools in terms of thinking about his sensory needs, his communication needs, and his attention needs and emotional regulation. So it was really important to come together. He started off at nursery and his behaviour became more and more challenging, and he ended up looking like a child with challenging behaviour, really, rather than the child that actually was really struggling with the boundaries, accepting routine, the overwhelming sensory demands, the social and communication demands, and quite quickly became his attendance reduced significantly and quite quickly became a non-attender. But if we look at the next slide, you can see actually what was really important for this young person in terms of making a difference here was, I think the most important thing I'd say is the relational approach, working with the family. But that also involved acknowledging the complex systems there and the number of people that were involved. There was fantastic long-term family support work that had been involved with the family. There was an occupational therapist that had a long-standing relationship with the family. And so it was us coming together to genuinely, actually we did a home visit with the family support worker, occupational therapist, speech and language therapist, and the educational psychologist all in one visit to genuinely explore and understand together what the parents' concerns were, what their worries were, what their fears were, what their hopes were, and even more so relating to the young person who used very little language, but between us and with the parents and people that had known him over time, we were able to get a very clear picture that he would need considerable flexibility. He needed a physical outlet in school and things that would motivate him. And that was fun, friendships, animals, and people noticing when he had done well. So through a really joined up piece of work and a flexible approach, we have managed to identify the provision that the family are confident that will meet his needs, and he is now making small steps into that transition into school with a very carefully planned transition plan. But I think the key things of learning for us around that were the importance of working together and developing a trusting relationship, both with the young person, but also equally with the family, and ensuring that that relational approaches have been embedded with the school as well. So it's remained solid for that, for the family and the young person. And that seems to be a real safety net. Should anything start to go wrong, they know where to go for support so that we can catch it early. Thank you.
Hi everybody, so it's my turn to jump in and speak for a little bit. I'm Melissa Forrest, Community Wellbeing Team Manager at YMCA East Surrey, and I'm here really as a Surrey Wellbeing Partnership representative today. Obviously we're all working in collaboration, and it's really evident from the range of people that have joined today and everybody's different professions, which is fantastic. Obviously Surrey Wellbeing Partnership is part of the Mindworks Alliance. And I just wanted to talk, before I go into the case study that we've got, just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how this came about really. And this was a response to a need to upskill practitioners working with children and young people and families experiencing EBSNA in their client-facing roles as part of the Surrey Wellbeing Partnership. And it really was sort of identified that practitioners felt quite unclear about the direction of their short-term work with young people that they were doing, experiencing EBSNA, very high expectation when referrals came through from families, from schools, to wave a magic wand that sadly none of us have, to kind of solve this within a short-term intervention of 8 weeks, which is obviously not doable. So in collaboration with Dave, we worked out how we could deliver some training to upskill practitioners and support them in their work. So some new SWP practitioner training was introduced in February 2024. And this is all based around exactly the same concepts, the same psychological frameworks, and using the same language that you're hearing today, so that we are all delivering that same consistent message in supporting children, young people and families with regards to EBSNA. There was a 2-hour training session for practitioners, and following this were 3 reflective practice follow-up groups, which gave practitioners space to discuss and reflect the work that they're doing. And we have recently just sort of launched some regular training, annual training, regular reflective practice groups that practitioners can access, in the hope that these frontline practitioners really do feel more supported in delivering short-term interventions for young people, and that again they align with the messages and the frameworks that you're hearing today, and just keeping that consistent message for professionals across Surrey so that we're all on the same page in support. So that leads me on to the next slide. Thanks, Annika, with regards to the case study. And just as a result of this support and training, lovely case study from one of our practitioners. The presenting challenges, I'll sort of run through things quickly, but I've highlighted here kind of the key things in relation to what we're talking about today, the different psychological frameworks that Dave and Nicola have already talked about and how that links in. So we had a 14-year-old girl struggle within school, particularly around change, moved to secondary school during COVID. And as we know, it was a hugely difficult time for everybody, particularly for young people who were making any kind of transition, whether it was primary, secondary, college, university, missed out on all of those transition activities that would have helped with that, and therefore as a consequence experienced difficulties in making healthy friendships and having that sense of belonging within school. And obviously belonging was one of those key factors that Dave has already talked about within the resilience ball framework. These needs that this young person was experiencing were then communicated via behavioural issues, which we obviously see a lot. Lessons were avoided, behaviour got worse, and here's just that reference again to the key functions of EBSNA and those push-pull factors that push away from school. So school started to be avoided. But what helped at school? So moving on to those positives, so meetings with school, helping sort of the bonding with those friendships, again referring back to the resilience ball, school understanding needs, so all of that sort of the curiosity, the compassion, the finding out from the young person what their needs were. Fairly simple things, potentially a change in tutor, just to one that helped that child feel the sense of belonging, and bringing them back into school, bringing that pull back into school, better relationships with school staff and new friendships. So again, referring to those the key functions of EBSNA that Nicola talked about earlier. Thanks, Annika. And then what happened? What helped at home? And these were really around the kind of the boundaries, the things that were put in at home. We talked again, Nicola mentioned again earlier about sort of actually some of those pulls that were keeping young people at home, some of the things, the rewards and the things they might be experiencing that were far more attractive being at home than they were at school. So in this particular case, the young person needed to get up at the same time as if they were going to school. There wasn't any access to phone or TV or laptop. School work still needed to be completed, chores needed to be done, and all of those things like electronics were accessible after school was finished. Really key fundamentals, lots of empathetic listening, problem solving, talking through challenges, and really supporting that young person back into school. When the child was at school, if they needed to sort of message home to parents, acknowledging those feelings, the parent was praising them for trying their hardest, keeping those levels of positivity going. But yeah, the sort of the push away from home, the no sleeping, the boredom, keeping the boundaries in around what would happen when they weren't attending school, again relating to those key functions of EBSNA and the push-pull factors. And just to sort of conclude, really a lovely positive result in terms of attendance. We've talked a lot about it is attendance, but actually it's participation and engagement. But this person reported the attendance back in sort of 23, 24 being at 79.1%, and just over the last 4 weeks that increased to about 89.5%. So yeah, hopefully a really nice sort of case study of potentially what a lot of young people are experiencing within that spectrum of EBSNA, and hopefully just a little overview of how practitioners within the partnership and within the Mindworks Alliance are upskilling and learning and being able to support more young people and families. Thanks, Annika. Brilliant,
thank you. Hopefully taken together, those 3 examples just really highlight the breadth, the issue of breadth, and no one size fits all when talking about something complex and interactive like EBSNA. In the case I described, it was quite a lot around home-school partnership facilitated by a primary mental health worker, and the skill development and a trusted adult really helped. Nicola, I feel like you really spoke to a really complex situation where multiple professionals, that kind of team around a child approach, was really key in moving things on. And Melissa, the list of what helped at home seemed long in your example, and I imagine that was really helpfully facilitated by trust, that psychological safety between the SWP practitioner and the family, or the school and their advocacy with home. And again, I'll just go back to those key words: curiosity, compassion, and partnership. None of those, what worked, can happen until we have parents, school, professional all speaking to the shared goal, a shared understanding of need, and trusting each other to listen, to empathize, and to get it. It's really that experience of someone getting me, getting my school, getting my family context, that's so critical. Once you got that, you can then start introducing change, challenge, the things that work. And we're going to move on now to resources. Loads of resources out there for EBSNA. I'm going to signpost later to the EBSNA Padlet. It's a kind of wild west of a digital resource packed with uncurated but helpful resources for all different kinds of EBSNA activity. Everything we describe now can be found there, and/or we'll tell you where you can get it. So the one I wanted to share was this mapping the landscape activity. Really useful for getting child, young person voice. It's good, I think, because it's visual. So if you have a young person who's anxiously avoiding many and varied things, or social communication is difficult, or just the pressure and threat of talking about their experience of school is too high, sometimes doing something you can hold and look at is going to be more accessible than trying to do the chat thing. And what it's asking is, what's your lived experience of school? On a 5-point scale, I avoid this to I enjoy this. Lots of different visuals, looking at different experiences in the school day. There's a primary version that has a bit more, hanging up my coat, carpet time for early years, and there's a secondary variant as well. And they're just picking up a picture. So number 1, greeting other students in the tutor group in the morning, and they're just putting it based on their lived experience. Actually, I enjoy that bit of school, or actually that's the bit of school that I really avoid. You can imagine on a case-by-case basis, you're going to get different profiles of what is enjoyable about school and what is avoiding or avoidant around school. Particularly relevant for a young person who's in that function 1 or function 2, so that general anxiety around the school environment or specific things. And actually, it's an activity like this can really help you work out what are the specific school factors that are causing anxiety. And that just enables you to then have a better shared understanding of need. You can communicate that to parent. You can talk about that more openly with the young person. Then you get a bit of a choice. To what extent are we going to learn skills to cope with these experiences that are you're avoidant of, or how much are we going to modify the environment so that you don't have to avoid them? They're just not going to be as much of your school experience anymore. Thank you.
Something that I've used a little bit is the school wellbeing cards, which are developed by Jerica Holder. And these are a set of child-centred tools, and they're grounded in the resilience research. So really connect with what Dave was saying earlier about trying to draw on strengths of the young person and help them come to a point of being able to identify risk factors for themselves, but also protective factors and strengths that might be used in school to promote connectedness, belonging and well-being for the young person. And again, it's a visual aid, which means it's very helpful if children and young people are stressed or anxious. It's probably aimed at key stage 2 and above for most use. And I find this really helpful when thinking about worry and happiness, anxiety, or something difficult in a young person's life, meaning attending school is challenging for them, and there's no sort of simple solution or single cause. This gives an opportunity to really explore and discuss around school experiences, and recognises the importance of hearing the young person's voice, and particularly with these engaging and planning a way forward. There's different activities you can do with this, but there's a card sorting activity which empowers children to share their experiences of school and get some insight into their strengths and barriers that they encounter during those experiences. It lets you think about risks, whether the young person might feel worried at home, whether they feel unwell when they think about school, if they worry about schoolwork. It also helps them reflect on where they might have resilience and what that might be. So noticing strengths and protective factors in their life, for example, family and friends talking positively about school, knowing what they want to do when they leave school. We know that's a massive motivating factor for young people to start to want to engage and have a meaningful experience in some way for planning their future. Or even being able to identify one person at school that they can talk to about their worries. And through sort of different sorting activities, you can help the young person work out what's true about them, maybe what's not so true about them, or thinking about risk factors, some of the 5 top most important things to them that they might need to think about. How do they address those? And similarly to how Dave was talking, in addressing those, is it a case of skilling them up, teaching them new skills? Or is it a case of changing the environment or changing adult responses to them, or other people response around them? It's also thinking about resilience factors. So that they talk about things that you might change, but that would be in a way of saying, you know, what I want to do when I get to school. How do I talk that up? How do I adjust that? How do I reflect on that? How does that help me feel more motivated? And what do I need if I want to be a car mechanic when I leave school? What do I need to do? And working with school then in terms of a protective factor, because of engaging motivation and participation, maybe thinking about an internship or work experience, or even really simple things like linking with a family friend that runs a garage, or going to visit the local mechanic in the community that will just show them a car engine, that kind of thing. So it can be really small steps, but it's thinking about what's important to that young person, and these cards are a great way of kind of identifying that and exploring risk and resilience factors to try and draw out positives and motivations, while also thinking about how to manage and balance things that are more challenging. It also gives a nice way of being able to share experiences slightly indirectly, so they can explore possibly feelings that are otherwise hard to express and discuss. I know these cards, I've used them in my work as an EP, but I've also know that they're used widely by learning mentors, ELSAs, SENCOs, social workers, school nurses, child and family support workers. So there really is a good breadth of use for them, and they're really accessible for a range of functions, and I think they are a nice, easy resource to have on you for pulling out to support discussions in a way. And you can see there at the end, you can have a sort of summary activity, and that's sort of part of your plan formation in what we're going to do next, how that's going to look in the different areas. So I hope that's helpful, and that's stored in the resources at the end. That's by Jerica Holder, and they're available to buy online.
I'll just jump in at the very end then, Nicola.
Yeah.
Just to add even more enthusiasm, what I really love about this, and it's the top 5 I'd most like to change. You get a goal out of the young person from this kind of visual activity. So they enjoy doing the activity, learn lots about it. It's all that curiosity work. But if you get a young person to say what they want to change, that can be so protective in the context of increasing participation or overcoming a particular anxiety. I love it when kids get a chance to say the goal that they want to work on, and then you can just say, yes, let's do it.
Yeah, and not even just saying it, they're putting them there, they're setting it out, and they're organising it. So it's really you just sort of facilitating them, sorting through and working through it. So I absolutely agree. And today, most kids have a phone with them at most times, so they can take that as a live photo of their actions, take it away with them, and record it up in a way that they feel useful.
So we're going to just spend the last 5 minutes, so at pace again, just a speedy nod to all of the very helpful resources out there, and the different professionals you might kind of try and link in with outside of conversations you've already had. So this is resources and signposting time. The first thing is the Surrey local offer. So all of the terminology, lots of signposted professional support, and some Surrey consistent documentation. So discovery conversations, support planning, they can all be found on the local offer EBSNA page. If you Google local offer and EBSNA, you will find yourself there. Thank you, Family Voice Surrey parents, for suggesting these two websites, Not Fine in School and Missing the Mark. Websites particularly helpful for normalising the experience of a parent standing alongside their child or young person in meeting this complex need. And finally, there's the Padlets. So there's the Wild West Professionals Padlet I mentioned earlier, has all of the resources, not particularly well curated, but have a browse through. Mapping the landscape, drawing the ideal self, best practice guidance documents, they're all found there. There's a better curated version for parents. And thank you for the Educational Psychology Service for kind of reining in some of the resources to make that more accessible. Thanks, Annika. In terms of wider professionals, it's a difficult one to answer which professionals can help with EBSNA, because EBSNA is such a broad category of need, and the whole kind of theme of today is we've got to be curious around what is this non-attendance communicating. Is this non-attendance because of anxiety? If so, you might want to have a look at the Surrey Wellbeing Partnership or the Mindworks website and try and find a professional who does targeted work on specific anxieties. So that'd be a really appropriate use of the school-based needs team, for example, where I sit. Is it something to do with a relationship at home? Is it to do with those kind of basic needs? You might be thinking more about a social care professional, a family support worker, homeschool link worker, access through school, or just the school partnership more generally. Is this a matter of mastery and their experience of learning? In which case you might be thinking about some learning support through specialist teachers of inclusive practice through STIPs. So which professionals can be helpful? Many and varied professionals already help and are protective and preventative around non-attendance and promote participation of our children and young people more generally. Move on to the next slide about the Educational Psychology Service offer in particular.
Yeah, so we, the Educational Psychology Services, we've currently still huge numbers of education healthcare needs assessments coming in. So unfortunately, that's a focus for us, as that's a statutory requirement for our service. But alongside that, we're involved in training with Mindworks. We do the whole school training. We do, we have what's flagged up there is the EBSNA support role training. So that's a kind of key adult training, or for an LSA, TA type role, or specialist teacher within a school. There's two mornings of training and follow-up supervision, 2 follow-up supervision sessions, which I think are really helpful for developing an understanding, beginning to engage in a piece of work, and then bringing that piece of work to ongoing supervision to shift that progress. And actually, I was with the EP that had just come straight from it yesterday, who had really interesting discussions with all of the key workers together. So really being able to share good practice, support each other, and move your work on. We also have access to consultation lines, so that's through schools, that's accessible through schools. If you've got a concern, you need to join up with the school concerned, and they know how to book in to speak to us, as they do in terms of, we have an needs analysis programme and also access to their school EP to discuss things further. Yeah, and that's what I was just discussing there, about access to a consultation model where that can be really targeted to a particular need, and schools are aware how to do that. So it would be linking up with the school that is the child's or young person's, where they're on roll, to organise that.
Excellent. And just to go back to the opportunity presented by Mindworks as well, all schools in Surrey will have a linked school-based need practitioner, often a primary mental health worker, and that's the best entry point into those curious conversations around how can this mental health need be supported, if that is what the underlying need might be. Just want to point out ordinary available provision. One of the themes today has been around curiosity, compassion, and in particular partnership, homeschool partnership. I think so often a sticking point and a breakdown in trust and communication happens between home and school when there are different expectations around what can be achieved in the school environment, what modifications or adjustments are possible. Our role, I'm advocating, is to facilitate a good partnership, one where there is good communication and flexibility, compromise, negotiation. All that said, it can sometimes be helpful to have an external authority set what is reasonable to expect from schools as a baseline. I wouldn't want this to be a limiting list, but it's a fair expectation that all schools should be providing at least this listed on the screen here. And actually, the ordinary rateable provision sets out what schools can be expected in many different areas: social, emotional, mental health, cognition and learning, physical sensory needs, and around communication. So I see it as professionals, our role is often around mediation between home and school. We're about repairing a relationship, sometimes just having a kind of externally given semi-objective fact around, look, this is the fair expectation on a school, can help begin that repair. And then hopefully lead on to more creative discussions around what else can we provide in our setting, or what else can be protective. So have a look at that, it's on the local offer. That's what the local offer looks like, and that's the EBSNA page. And as an example of some of the resources found on the local offer, these are Surrey-wide consistent templates for discovery conversations. So sitting down with a young person, if they're able to engage in that kind of activity, and talking about their experience, what goal they would set for themselves, what protective factors are in place, and what support they would like for themselves. The same for their parent and carer. And then with those two bits of work completed, you can collaborate on that support plan. How are we going to move forward with our shared understanding of need towards our shared goal of what looks a bit better in the future? So just some tools to aid that kind of collaborative piece of work there.